The Irish were onto something when they created the proverb, a good laugh and a long sleep are the best cures in the doctor's book. Jimmy Valvano, a college basketball coach, also known for his inspirational ESPY Awards speech just weeks before he died of cancer, said you should do 3 things each day. You should laugh, you should think, you should have your emotions move you to tears. That's a heck of a day. It has been observed that children actually laugh about 400 times a day on average, whereas adults laugh about 17 times. What happens to adults? Psychologists, neuroscientists, philosophers will struggle to explain exactly what makes people laugh. You may say jokes and humor, but we laugh most frequently when we are with other people. It's a social emotion, and we use it to make and maintain social bonds, connections, which makes me wonder if one of the biggest voids in our lives these last 5 months is perhaps laughter. Plato and other ancient Greek philosophers claimed people would laugh at earlier versions of themselves and also at the misfortunes of others because of feeling superior. Sigmund Freud held that laughter allows people to let off steam and release pent-up nervous energy. People also laugh at the absurdity between expectations and reality. And that is exactly where we find Abraham and Sarah and their laughter. They were older than dirt when God promised them a child. Their increasingly sagging skin and deeply lined faces contradict the possibility of any kind of parental future. So how could anyone blame either of them for laughing at God's ludicrous idea? Of course, Abraham had heard the story before when God told him that his descendants would be like the stars. Well, Abraham has had enough of this absurd game, and he fell on his face and laughed and thought, can a child be born to me, a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? What kind of twisted sense of humor does God have? This story has glorious failure written all over it. And speaking of failure, you know that Albert Einstein was not able to speak until he was 4 years old. His teachers said he would never amount to much. Walt Disney was fired from the newspaper for lacking imagination and having no original ideas. The Beatles were rejected by a record company who said, we don't like their sound. They have no future in the business. Oprah Winfrey was demoted from her job as a news anchor because she wasn't fit for television. Beethoven's music teacher once told him that he was a hopeless composer. Abraham Lincoln lost almost every election until he was finally elected president of the United States. Thomas Edison went through thousands of experiments before inventing the light bulb. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. We know how all of these stories worked out. We all fail. We all fall short. We may question our place in the world. We may even fall on our face and laugh in the face of an outcome outside the realm of what we think is possible. Expectations versus reality. Abraham and Sarah had pretty low expectations, I think, which is why they had taken matters into their own hands before. Sarah had already commissioned her slave girl Hagar to have her child with Abraham. And so surely Ishmael is the only son of Abraham that anyone is ever going to see, right? But God reiterates the nonsense that Sarah will indeed give birth. By now, Good old Abe is howling with unrestrained laughter. Silly God. Kids are for people at least under the age of 40. Well, some time has passed, and Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, Ishmael, and their whole clan have made camp in the desert. And suddenly in the blistering afternoon heat, God or angels or both appear. Abraham sees 3 men just out of the blue standing near him. Without hesitation or comment, Abe rushes to meet them and bows low to the ground in appropriate Middle Eastern hospitality. He promises the strangers some water and bread. He then hurries to the tent and shouts out orders to Sarah to hurry and make bread or cakes. And last time I checked, I'm not sure you can really hurry that process. He then ran to his herd, grabbed his finest calf, then picks up some curds and milk and sets it all before these 3 visitors. So much for just a quick snack. And now the fun begins. After a delicious meal, the 3 visitors, apparently in chorus, inquire, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" Then one of them started the whole laughter process all over again by boldly claiming that in a year, Sarah would have a son. Boy, we sure need to be careful about when we eavesdrop, don't we? Because who knows what kind of stuff we'll hear. I imagine that this was the hardest Sarah had laughed in a very long time. Not only was she laughing at the thought of having a baby, but she was laughing at the process that involves with ancient Abe over there. I'm gonna have a baby with this old guy? There's that old Woody Allen quote that says, if you wanna make God laugh, then tell God about your plans. Well, God seems more annoyed than humored at this point. Why did Sarah laugh? God says to Abraham. And why did she say that she was too old to have a child? Is anything too hard for God? Is anything too hard for God? Is anything too hard for God? Perhaps some of us think that it is, and so does Sarah. Expectations versus reality, I suppose. I didn't laugh, Sarah says. What you said makes perfect sense. I wouldn't laugh at that. It's kind of like when I ask my boys who didn't clean up their mess, or whose clothes are all over the floor, or who broke the thing, or who didn't flush the toilet. Well, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. It's not mine. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh yes, God says to Sarah, you did laugh. And with that word laughter ringing in our ears, isn't it funny how God ends up getting the last laugh? This senior citizen couple has a son, and they name him Isaac, which means laughter. Is anything too hard for God? I don't think this question calls us to forget all we know of science and history and to claim that anything can happen when God is around. We may pray to the same God, but our stories too often unfold in a variety of ways, both joyful and heartbreaking, both as the oppressed and as the oppressor. But maybe it's simply about how God still matters in the ways of humanity, that we are not alone in this madness, that God is involved in very deep, astounding, surprising ways that can make us laugh. Maybe the craziness of Abraham and Sarah's story is a reminder that nothing is too hard for a God who made it all and still loves it all. There were no easy parts on the journey that unfolded for Abraham and Sarah, who basically had one foot in the grave before God showed up. Understanding, accepting, responding, doing all that in the midst of so much unknown and uncertainty is never easy for any of us. But along the journey, Abraham actually made altars along the way in celebration of how God showed up in his life and reassured him and Sarah of the promises. Because while the steps may be unknown, the steps still always draw us toward what a known God is doing. A God who says, I will make my covenant with you. I will bless you. I will give you a son. I will bless the world through you. I will do what I say. I will be your God. I will see you through this. God has a knack for showing up in our lives, regardless of our shortcomings and mistakes and stubbornness, and even in our skeptical laughter. Maybe God shows up when we least expect it in order to call us away from the familiar so that we might know God in the unfamiliar as well. Isn't that much of what life looks like for us right now? And through it all, it's always about living into the invitation to be God's gift to the world. A world where there is simply not enough laughter, where there are too many people who have no reason to laugh, or who laugh for all the wrong reasons. God shows up in the bleak and hopeless state of Abraham and Sarah's lives, where any potential for newness, for new life, just seems non-existent. They're living between the reality of a somewhat controllable world and the crazy promises of God. And that, my friends, is exactly the place of faith. And this is where you and I live as well, between how we see ourselves and how God sees us, between what we expect and what God actually does and what God may actually do. And oh, the things that God can do with our laughter. Amen.